All right. Hi, I'm Stacia Nelson with Pivot Strategies. And with me, I have Wil Taylor today. He is the head of creative for Pivot Strategies. And we are going to have a conversation about race. And we are, first and foremost, not experts in race, but we know that we need to help figure things out. And so Wil and I have been having some dialogue since the George Floyd killing that happened in Minneapolis a few months ago. And we decided that we're going to record one of our conversations and share it with you all. So I'm going to let Wil introduce himself first. Wil, do you want to just share a little bit about you?
Hi, I'm Wil Taylor. Like Stacia said, I am head of creative at Pivot Strategies, originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and have been here in Minneapolis, Minnesota the last 2 decades. So I feel that I am a transplanted Minneapolis native now. Went to the University of Minnesota, played soccer there, so was involved for a long time in the youth and coaching sphere of Minnesota soccer as well. Yeah.
Great. So when the George Floyd killing first happened, I reached out to you just to kind of have a conversation about race and like what we should, first of all, if you've experienced anything at Pivot that I should be aware of, because I wanted to be very aware of anything that was going on. And I felt like we just had a really open and honest and great conversation. So I just want to start out by talking about like the importance of that within the workplace, like how you felt about me reaching out and having a conversation together.
I think that the George Floyd murder was I think it was so real for everyone because it was captured on video. And I still, to this day, haven't been able to myself watch that because I think it brings such a visceral reaction that, for you to understand that the effect that a situation like that has on someone, I applaud you for one, recognizing that, and then two, for reaching out. Like you said, the conversation, just starting the conversation is important, because regardless of how you think you may feel, for me anyway, just vocalizing things and saying things out loud has been therapeutic, and hopefully it can help someone else in the way it has for me.
So first of all, what are you hoping people get out of hearing this conversation, Wil?
I understand my situation is not unique, and whether you're a movie executive in California that we've seen, or a Ivy League professor, or someone that's a quote unquote criminal, that we've seen people from all walks of life be subjected to things because of the color of their skin. So like we were saying, I think it's important for the people just, to recognize that things exist, and that no matter who you are, regardless of what situation you come from, or how strong you think you are mentally or physically, that things can have a toll emotionally, and talking about those things and sharing those things, which is why I wanted to have this conversation, not only for myself but for others. I think can be helpful. Going forward, I think it can be helpful because in order for us to work together, people need to have a dialogue, because I think a lot of times confrontation comes from lack of understanding. And if people were able to have an open dialogue, without fear of maybe retribution, or how that may be perceived, I think that, maybe you won't change someone's mind, but it could give them a perspective that, an honest perspective that they can.
Yeah, I totally agree that. And what I love about that, Will, is it's like we are in the field of communications, right? We are in the field
Mhm.
of like creating clarity as professionals. And what you just described is literally talking about the importance of these conversations is about creating clarity and bringing people together. And in my mind, like if you don't have those conversations, you have assumptions, right? Because you don't
Mhm.
know what's really happening in someone's mind or what has really happened in their life. So you just assume, and even whether you're assuming negative or assuming positive, you're assuming something and you are uninformed. And just by having the conversation with you, it has informed me so much more, and it allows me to be a better leader and a better friend and a better community member, because I'm more aware of what's going on with someone who is important to me. And when someone is important to me, I'm more, protective and want to make sure that they're protected. And so I think exactly what you said, like we have to be able to just have these conversations. And we started out saying like we aren't experts on how to fix all
Right.
of this,
Sure.
but what we've learned just by having this conversation together is like the power of having that conversation together. And like I think on both sides, to really learn. So I love that. um
Yeah.
so tell me, if something happens, if you see something happen, whether someone's being racist towards you blatantly, or whether it's just kind of that underlying, in the workplace kind of racism, how do you help like move the needle, and create awareness around racism? I know
Um,
it's a big question.
right. And I don't. I think for myself, I'm still finding out how to react um, to those situations. Fortunately, I don't think I have something maybe overtly that I've had, maybe just a gut reaction to. You think how you'll react. I think it's the subtle situations, not the covert ones, the covert racism that you have to, really temper of how to react. For me personally, I have done it in a way and I think that's just my personality, but making them aware of the situation without necessarily overtly calling them out to it. Um, and I'll just use this as an example. A past employer made a comment to me about how well I spoke. And, I know they knew my background. I was an employee. They had seen my resume. I know that they knew that I went to the same university that their kid went to, that worked at the same place. So for them, there still wasn't that correlation. Well, why wouldn't a college educated person be able to speak well? And for them, they only saw my race, and only I assumed, and I fought myself for maybe not having that conversation and telling them blatantly, well, why shouldn't I be able to? But, I think that I don't want to say people are, I was afraid of having that hard conversation and what it might lead to. And maybe I wasn't as ready to have that full conversation of, what that meant. And instead of just try to make them aware of, well, kind of, and maybe, and that's how they say Joe Biden. It made me think of Joe Biden, of the all shucks kind of way of, well, yeah, I was raised so and so this way, and I went to the same school as your son, of trying to see a relationship that way instead of maybe calling someone out. Because maybe, when someone is called out, maybe sometimes they aren't as receptive all the time.
But I think to your point though, it's hard when they're like clearly not trying to be a blatant jerk, right? They're trying to have a conversation with you, but what they just said is incredibly offensive. And so I guess the question is like, do we have a responsibility to say something in that moment, um, to get them away from that, because it's like there's something about that, right? Because if you don't say something, doesn't it, like, then do you feel like you absorb it and it like lives
I
in you?
definitely do. And that's something that I, grapple, like, well, to this day, I'm like, still grappling, well, should I have called him out, my aunt, who grew up and marched in the 60s, would say she definitely would have called him out. And I know exactly, what how she would have responded in that situation. And, regardless, I do feel that, yes, there's a responsibility to call them out. Necessarily, should I put them on the defensive? I don't think. I think there's a way to have that conversation without putting someone on the defensive, and I don't think I necessarily have found that way yet. Um, and I know that there must be for myself a way that's it's somewhere in the middle and not on the end of either spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be a way of finding some way that's just not Minnesota nice and not full militant. So,
Right, right, right. um
yeah,
and I think part of what's hard about it is you can't really like prepare. You don't know when it's going to happen, right? When someone's going
right,
to like just say something to you like that, you think in your mind, like, as we're talking about it, like, oh, I would totally say something, and I would, you know, I would call them out but not make them feel defensive. But then when it happens, it's like it's kind of shocking, right? Like
exactly.
you don't really, like, you don't even really absorb it all right away until after, and you're kind of like, did that just, I think that just happened, did that really just happen to me, did they really just say that to me?
Right. Well, yeah, it puts you on the defensive end first, which is
Right.
why I think, at least for me, my reaction makes me want to put them on the defensive end. But yeah, I think it is important for someone to make someone aware. I don't think letting someone slide um, is, especially the way our society has come now. I mean, even people that still try to deny, things. I think that we're at a point to where now people need to be called out, and people need to be made aware of their thoughts and
Yeah.
actions. Yeah, and
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think what I love about you kind of stay above and you keep positive, and you realize that you can only control your own attitude and your own reaction, and that that's a reflection of who you are as a person. And you don't let yourself turn into what they might stereotypically expect you to be. That so you show, like, you demonstrate in that moment, just by being you, that that prejudice exists, and that you aren't going to fit that mold. And so can you say a little bit about that? Because I respect that part so much about like how you responded, because I think I would probably have gone crazy on people by now if I had gone through what you've gone through. But you've held it together, you've held your cool.
I mean, you started to touch on it there. I mean, and we talked about regardless of your station in life. I think about the first the vice presidential debate and how people were critiquing Kamala Harris, and not only things just about being a woman, it was also about being a Black woman as well, and you know these microaggressions and things that Mike Pence or a white counterpart would not have to answer to, just about her facial expressions and being an angry woman or being an angry Black woman, um, because those expectations exist, and that type of racism, it does exist, regardless of who you are internally. So regardless of what you do, people are going to have those perceptions,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, you can't let that control you. And one
Mm-hmm.
thing, yeah, you can control is your attitude, and how you react to that. I think it's an opportunity also to give people different perspective and to prove to them that your monolith perceptions are wrong, you know, and that you need to, well, ultimately it's change. I mean, you know, but at least to start thinking differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about this earlier, but just having a conversation with people, calling them out, but in a way that doesn't put them on the defense when you hear things. And then also just like, I think what's been really helpful for me is sharing your story, right? What is more educating than someone you care about telling a personal story of being hurt or afraid or in danger because of the color of your skin, right? And so I know it's exhausting, and like I applaud you for continuing to tell these stories, especially in a work environment where it's maybe more uncomfortable than when we're, you know, sitting around with friends having a drink. But I feel like that is like the biggest impact. And so like if anybody takes anything away from us recording this conversation, I would just say like I was afraid to have the conversation with Will, or slightly uncomfortable, but like having that dialogue informed me. I've shared stories with now my community because of Will. And so you sharing those stories is like had a huge impact and ripple effect in probably my community, in my world. So you know, I think one of the takeaways is just like we need to be having these conversations, and don't be like the typical Minnesota, I'm just not going to talk about it because it's a problem, right?
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, been helpful for me, and you know, having these conversations, you know, even for myself, makes me, you know, realize that, yeah, it's, you know, even though the onus may not necessarily be all upon me, there's still a two-way street, and there is some responsibility. And yes, having and sharing those stories and opening that dialogue is important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing them, Will. I really appreciate it. Um, I would encourage everyone to read Will's blog post, just going more in depth on some of the experiences that he's had right here in our backyard in the Twin Cities, and also growing up and in the work environment and in the community. And feel free to share your own stories to add to the dialogue.